Throughout the unit on space versus place, we've been thinking about and discussing the difference between the virtual world and the physical world. This particular portion of this unit is going to talk about when those two intersect in a negative way. So we're going to talk about cyber terror. Let's refresh. Remember, in cyberspace, we have many different things that are linked together through a broadband network. It gives us high-speed communication, continuous access, and we can do it for a fixed access fee and a low price. So we have our cyber communities, we have our medical institutions, we have home, we have information, we have governments, all linked together. We are a network society, and we do depend on information technology and infrastructure. We are no longer a manufacturing society or an agrarian society as we were in the past. We are a network society and an information society. So everything that we have is linked together through our economy, our national security. They're linked together through cyberspace. So how can attacks on this through cyberspace affect us in the place where we live? How can the virtual world affect the real world in terms of cyberspace attacks? So here we see there is a very real connection between what happens in space and the effects in place. And from the article we read, we saw that there are 5 levels of threats in cyberspace. And we'll go through those one by one after we preview them here. First, we have the home user, the small business level. Next, we have our large enterprise level. Third, we have critical sectors and infrastructure. Fourth, national issues and vulnerabilities. And finally, fifth, global threats. So we'll look at each one of those and see how they relate to the umbrella model of communication technology. Let's start with the home user or small business. The umbrella level for this, when we think about it, is really probably the individual user. That's the one that best applies for the home user, you or I, or for a small business. So think about the threats that can occur. What can happen? Well, one of your classmates told me that they are able to use someone else's internet connection in their apartment, so they are not having to pay for internet at home right now. So you can use somebody else's internet, or you could do something a little more sinister and take control of an unprotected computer. And then you can use these unprotected computers to launch different types of attacks. These zombie machines then can attack critical infrastructures, and the trail is obliterated. And then instead, they come to an innocent person whose computer was used for a sinister purpose. So the home user of the small business can have someone take over their computer or their internet connection and use it to cause havoc in the physical world. Next, we have large enterprises. And what do we mean by large enterprises? What are large enterprises? Well, these are things that make our economy run, such as corporations. They are things that make our government run, different government entities. And they are what we're doing right now, things that make education run, universities. These are all large enterprises. Now they're targeted for different reasons. They're not targeted to use one machine to launch an attack and hide the trail. What they're used for is the power of their large network. Each of these have large computer networks that you can use to have a greater influence on the online world, to take over the power of that network. So now when we're thinking about the umbrella model, we're thinking a different level. We're thinking the level of organizational infrastructure. So causing an entire corporation's computers to go down, or a government entity's, or a university's, can wreak havoc because of the power of the large network. It affects many people at once. So, for instance, if this Blackboard tool that we use were to go down for a week while we're taking a 4-week class due to a cyber terror attack, we would be in trouble because it would be very difficult for us to do this class and do it successfully if we lost control of that. And many other students who are taking courses online this summer in order to try to graduate on time, or even to graduate this summer, would be affected negatively. So the power of the large network is why large enterprises are targeted. Next, we can think about the critical sectors in infrastructure. And what this is where we have collaboration by organizations in political, economic, or social educational sectors. And so now we think of the old umbrella model, we're thinking of the social system level. So across corporations or across universities or government entities. And this is large scale. We're talking macro analysis here when we're looking at critical sectors and overall infrastructure. Next, we have national issues and vulnerabilities. And this deals with weaknesses in shared resources. So here we're thinking about, in the umbrella model, the hardware-software level. And the hardware and software that we use is something that many people use because otherwise we wouldn't be able to communicate with one another. So for instance, I told you to download QuickTime for this class. If you didn't have QuickTime, you wouldn't be able to have access to the videos that I'm showing. So shared resources, QuickTime is a standard format that everyone uses. National issues and vulnerabilities deal with things that lots of people use. So to coordinate at a high level, users must have software and hardware in common. So think of what we use. What's an example? An example of what we use is Microsoft Windows. Almost all of us, almost all people at educational institutions have to use Windows for some program or another, and most use it as their primary operating system. So if we all have that in common, we're susceptible to weaknesses in that, such as Microsoft Windows viruses. Every time Windows releases a new version, there are scores and scores of update packs that come out afterwards in order to allow us to have virus protection. And people write viruses from time to time. Those viruses that attack similar hardware or software that we have cause large problems in the real-world economy and can cause large problems in the real-world infrastructure. If someone was able to find a way to access defense networks and shut down communications amongst them because they all use the same type of hardware and software, then that could cause problems nationally. Finally, we'll look at the global level. Here we have to have international cooperation to monitor and prevent cyber attacks and prosecute cyber criminals. So for example, the issue of copyright in China is one that in the last 10 years has become very problematic. What happened in China in the past, according to Forbes magazine, in 2003, 90% of the application software, so things like Microsoft Office, was pirated in China. In order for us to enforce anything there, we have to have cooperation with the Chinese government. We can't go in and arrest people in China for pirating software because they're in a different place than we are. And we can't govern, even though it's a space issue, we can't govern in a different place because they're not under our jurisdiction. One website even showed the movie The Pacifier online without permission in 2005. Regardless of your opinion of whether that movie was even worth being shown online or not, it was problematic because of the copyright laws we have in the United States. Now, due to international pressure from the United States, China closed 205 websites in February of 2007 in a crackdown on internet piracy, but it still remains a large problem. So things like copyright that affect our economic system and revenue generation here are difficult to enforce in other countries. You can access these materials or share them online virtually in cyberspace, but there's no real way to prosecute people that are not in the same place. So let's think about cyber terror attacks. Have you heard about one? There are very few that we've heard about. Thus far, they've affected space more than place. So cyber terror attacks haven't shut down power plants. They haven't caused electrical systems to go down. They've affected things in space, so things like data on computers have been lost. Successful attacks have been mostly at level 1, or level of the individual user, so the home user or small business. One thing that some people have done and have been caught for doing is driving around to find unprotected networks and then using that to download child pornography onto their laptop computer while they're in a car. So that way they won't be traced for obtaining those illegal materials. Most of the cyber terror attacks that we've heard have been at that level. So the discussion question I want to ask you to write and respond to is the government right to spend the money that they do on stopping these things now? Or is this all just a hoax and another way for the government to give special contracts to people they prefer? What do you think? Respond to the discussion question and let me know.